first let's just take our background image, and we're going to set that to an order of -1 just to make sure that by default it's lower than everything else, so everything else will be on top of it. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to create a particle system. Now we're going to create a material, so you're going to right click, choose create, and choose material, and we'll call this rain mat. So what you're going to do is you're going to take an image, the one that says rain here, you're going to apply it to the rain mat, and then you will apply the rain mat to the particle system. So kind of a three-step process, so each is dependent upon the previous one. So when you click on rain mat, you'll see it says the texture here, and this is none. So just drag and drop the image that you want. In this case it's rain, so we'll drag and drop it there. So that's step one. And then step two is take the rain material and drag and drop it onto the particle system. Looks like garbage. That's because we have to choose how we want it to be shaded. So while you're still highlighted with rain material, click on the shader, and there's different ones you can choose, but like I'll use particles and then additive. Even before we run it, you can see that this is definitely too big. So what we'll do is we'll go to the particle system, and you can also see it's going the wrong direction. We will make this much smaller, so let's do start size of 0.2. We'll slide this over, slide this up. For shape, click on that, and we're going to make the size, the bottom, much bigger. So it's raining over a much larger area. We're also going to increase the emission, bump that up to 20. The reason why it's not higher is because we're actually going to make multiple of these. Now let's take this, so we clicked on the rotate, and we just rotate it like this, and now it's going in the right direction. Now depending if you want it to be like a downpour, you can rotate it so it's like pointing like straight down, or if you want it to be more of a light rain, maybe there's wind involved, and you can do that. And now what we're going to do is, just so that there's different rates, we're going to copy this particle system, paste, and now we're just going to move it around. So over and up, and we're going to actually change its speed. Let's make it 7. Quick change. We'll highlight. Actually, let's go do them individually. Choose pre-warm. That way it's going through an entire cycle to begin with. You're not always going to want pre-warm. Pre-warm is basically if something is already happening and it's looping. Like for instance, if there's a fire, you probably want the fire to be pre-warmed, no pun intended, because you're not trying to look for the fire starting, look at the fire already burning. Okay, so that's pretty good. Particle system probably could be a little bit smaller, the particles rather. So let's change it to like 1.7. Okay. And if you want, you can create one more. Put it somewhere in between. Kind of check to see where they all are. And give it a different speed as well. Make this one 6, so we have a 5, a 7, and a 6. So you definitely have multiple speeds now. Okay, brief break there. I have a pet peeve with Unity. I don't know if it's procedural, in other words, I'm making a mistake, or if it's a glitch, but for some reason when I try applying an animation to an object, sometimes it attaches to the wrong object. I'm not quite sure if it's procedural or what, but it's a nuisance. So anyways, click on game object, click on create empty, call it puddle. Click on add component, and we'll choose miscellaneous and animator. Now we're going to go to animation. We're going to take our images, Drag and drop them, and we'll call this puddle. We'll save it. Now it did work because puddle is the name of the object and puddle in this case is the name of the animation. But sometimes right here, this should be the name of the object. So sometimes it might actually say Battle BG or might say Particle System or Main Camera for some reason, and I haven't figured out why it attaches to the wrong object. But anyways, it worked, this one. I just want to mention that in case it ever happens to you. No, you're not insane. Or if you happen to know why it happens, feel free to let me know. Because at this point, I don't know if it's an ID10T error on my part or if it's a glitch. Unfortunately, 4.6 doesn't get supported anymore. They're on 5. Whatever. So we can just close that. And now what we're going to do, since these are a part of that animation and that animation is a part of this object, if you make a change to these, like we're going to make it bigger, drop that down to say 60. And yes, I said bigger. Since it's a ratio, you have to make it smaller to make the object bigger. This really doesn't matter the max size because it's such a small object anyways. So we'll click on apply, and let's just bring this order in layer 1, and it's gonna appear, let's move it just right of center, so it should be right there. And there it is. So there's our little splatter. You can see it's a little bit blurry, which actually kind of works since it's water. And now what we'll do is we'll take that puddle and we drag and drop it into our asset area. So by drag and dropping it from hierarchy to asset, it is now a prefab. So you can just delete that. And we're in the home stretch now. So we're going to write a little bit of code that will make this appear in random places. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the street object, the background. In a real game, you would probably have a game master object that's 6 one way, 1/2 dozen the other. I'm just going to add it to this one. So I'm going to click on the object, click on add component, choose new script, and we'll call this splatter control. We'll double click on that to open it up. And first thing we have to do is we have to create some variables. So we need a public transform, and we'll call it the puddle object. That way we can distinguish between which one's which. And it appears there, so you just drag and drop your prefab right into there. You can now instantiate that object from this script. So what we're going to do is we're going to randomize two things. One, when it appears. Two, where it appears. Specifically, its XY coordinates. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, so two more variables. Total time. As the name suggests, we're going to be tracking how much time has passed. And that's going to be a float, and it starts at 0. And then the next one is it's going to be an integer, and it's the XY location. So I just chose XY lock. You probably could have two different variables, one for X, one for Y, but we're going to be modifying this variable anyway. So what we're going to do is go into the update section. I'm going to paste this in because it's a bit of typing, but then I'll explain each line. Alright, so first line, total time plus equals time dot delta time. So here's the total time variable up here. What we're saying is this variable is going to be increased by the amount of time that has passed. If you remember from math class, delta is change in, so the change in time. So total time is equal to whatever it's currently equal to plus time dot delta time. So in other words, it's a running total of time dot delta time. It's a running of total of how much time has passed. Here's that XY location variable is equal to random dot range, and then these are the lower and upper points, supposedly inclusive. I don't know if it's just random chance, but I've never actually seen this upper number appear, so I tend to bump this up one, but you may find that it's just fine. So this is the lower number, this is the upper number. So now we've got an if statement. As always, each individual component has to be surrounded by parentheses. So that one has parentheses, that one has parentheses, and the whole thing has to be surrounded by another set of parentheses. So again, total time, if total time is greater than 0.3 and total time is less than 0.32. Now you got to be very careful. If this is too small of a gap, then what happens is the running total will blow past this, and this will never ever be true. So you don't want this really to be set to a single variable. And technically you probably could just do a lower. You probably don't need an upper as well, because as you'll see, we reset total time. But anyways, that's how I set it up. And then parentheses, since more than one line is getting performed after the if statement, you need the, brackets, not parentheses, sorry, brackets. And then it's just, as you can see, it's basically the same line repeated. So instantiate, what's being instantiated? That puddle object. Where is it getting instantiated? It's at a new vector 3. There's the XY lock. So X, Y, and Z. And it's using the rotation that the puddle object has naturally, that we're not going to be rotating it at all. And then just rinse and repeat, instantiate puddle object, new vector 3. This time we're adding one to the XY location, and we're adding one, we're adding one to both the X and Y location. And we reset total time back to 0. So that means that it's going to start counting again. And then when it gets back to 0.3, then what's going to happen, it'll instantiate these in new random places. So let's save that, and we just have to make one more change. Every time these get instantiated, they really need to be destroyed. You don't want all these objects just floating around out there. So what we're going to do is going to go to that puddle prefab. We're going to add a component, new script, and we're going to call this, let's call it self-destruct, because that's quite literally all this is going to do. So we're going to put that in the start. And the reason why we put it into the start is we want it to count as soon as it gets instantiated. And I'll show you what I mean by count. So destroy game object, and then this is an optional value you can put in here. And that is how long to wait. So I did a little bit of math. And since the frame rate is 18 frames per second for that puddle, and there's 11 frames, divide 11 to 18 comes out to 0.61. Doesn't have to be that complicated. You don't want it to destroy too quickly. So if you use a different frame rate, then this number would be different. So ultimately you're looking at the total frames divided by the frame rate to figure out how long it takes. These is a fraction or a decimal, you've got to put the F in there, and now it should work. There we go. So as you can see, it's randomized. There's some double splatters. Like in that area you saw it did it twice. But for the most part it's pretty good. It does seem to have a grouping, and it doesn't quite overlap as much as I'd want, but you can see that at this point it's just tweaking the variables, because as you can see the entire pavement does get covered, it's just sometimes it focuses on one area. So